everyone. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
We are going to talk about the 2020 sci-fi horror film Possessor today because we felt like it was a discussion to be had in our female Psychopath series because there is a female star of this movie that does some killing.
She does.
So again, this is a sci-fi horror film from 2020 and it's a psychological thriller. There's a lot of body horror in it. It explores a lot of psychological themes like identity and control and human existence and possession of others and all of that. So the film is about this corporate agent, Tasia Voss, played by Andrea Riseborough, and Jennifer Jason Leigh is actually in this movie as well.
She's really good in this.
She's really good too. And Christopher Abbott plays the person that she possesses, basically.
Colin Tate.
Yeah. And she uses a cranial implant to take control of other people's bodies. So if you and I were hanging out in our lives and all of a sudden we were taken over by an entity, basically, even though that's not the way it's constructed, it's constructed like we're all robots and like you could put a chip in and take over my whole existence. Voss's experiences on the job obviously cause her to struggle with detachment from her own identity, and I thought that was a really interesting sort of mental health piece because the devolvement of her psychology throughout the whole movie is that she becomes more and more detached from her own reality and becomes more and more attached to the male that she's inhabiting. She gets thoughts of violence. She has this really fragile state. They sort of start out the movie by you see her come out of possessing someone else, and the possessions always end with them having to kill themselves. And that's harder and harder and harder to do and more psychologically fucked up. And they can't really do it to themselves and they get really tired of that. And so you see her come out of one of those and she's very fragile and it takes a lot of time to recover. So right out of the gate, you understand what fragile work this is as far as how your mind is going to get fucked up. And ultimately she loses control, finds herself trapped in this other person's existence, which destroys her own identity in a way.
I think that's really the center of what this film is, right? I mean, it's really about the ability one has to lose their sense of self and the environmental or relational factors that can contribute. In this film, it's specifically being manipulated into becoming a sociopath.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that it's meta in the sense that it is, a lot of times when you see movies with sociopaths or psychopaths, it's very one-dimensional.
Very.
Where it's like, this happened to this person, they became this, or they're just a stone cold killer and they become this. This is layered. This is what I really like about this. And I was saying this to you before we started recording today, which is, not knowing much. I hadn't seen Possessor before, but I'd seen Infinity Pool, and this is Brandon Cronenberg's sophomore effort. To me, I enjoyed this so much more. Infinity Pool didn't give me this. I think it tried to be this. But I think this Brandon Cronenberg actually showed his real talent in this by how complicated and how layered he was able to describe personality and all the environmental and relational pieces that went into constructing this character, and how through doing something over and over and over again, how jaded we can become, and also how confused we can become. And then there's this, there's no spoilers on this episode, but there's this whole other piece we're not talking about that really sticks the ending. And it keeps taking all these turns.
Yeah, it does.
And then just the idea of a woman being able to go into a man's body for a day. And
yeah, that was fun, that whole scene where she's sort of like, oh, look,
she's
penis.
like, look, I have a penis.
Yeah, not that she's not done it before.
Right.
You get the sense she's been doing it for a long time.
But like they talk about in some of these articles, Colin Tate's character in some ways is a lot like her, where he's already somewhat jaded. He doesn't have a lot of friendships, relationships. She kind of goes into a male version of herself in this character. And I think that whether it's metaphorical or literal, these two brains start to kind of fight with one another.
Yeah.
And I think that piece to me was what was psychologically thrilling, was the way that Cronenberg really conceptualized their minds being in one body.
Yeah, because there's very much a relationship drama going on too. Like, she's separated from her husband, she's got a kid. They very much explicate in really cool ways how she's losing her sense of self when she comes out of that first possession.
Yeah.
And she goes to try to talk to her own kid, and she's like rehearsing how to be how to be herself again.
That was so strange.
Because she's so stuck in the other identity.
I know.
So she's like, "How was school today?" Da, 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 da. She's like practicing how to talk to her own kid, and I just thought that is so fascinating and something, we don't use chips to go into other people's existence, but I think it's relatable.
Yeah.
That's what's so interesting, because this movie is so trippy and so Brandon and so Cronenberg and all of that and sci-fi and everything, but there's this part of human existence that's really relatable with her. And then there's a relationship drama going in this other guy that takes up the bulk of the story that she possesses next. Like what Kathy was saying, that she feels really connected to this guy besides being in his body, and ends up being very protective and territorial and offended and all these things by the girlfriend's or fiance's father. And she goes off the rails basically inside of this guy's body. And I just thought it was interesting, because I was reading that Cronenberg said he wanted to make a film about someone who may or may not be an imposter in their life, in their own life. So maybe what you're seeing is that both her and the person and the guy that she possesses ultimately and loses her identity to, maybe they both felt like imposters in their lives. Like, he's dating some rich woman and he hates the whole scene.
Depressed.
He's depressed. Mm-hmm. It's, he makes good money, or she does, or he's living off her. I can't really tell all of that. They don't get into that minutia, but it's about they both feel like imposters in their life. And I think they both are in many ways. Like, they're living lives that don't resonate with them, which I think most humans can relate to on some level or some part of their life. Like, I didn't ever think I would be here kind of feeling.
Well, I also think it poses the just the thought around the importance of authenticity and what happens when we lose our sense of self and we lose who we are, or we don't have boundaries, or we don't understand, we don't have a stable sense of who we are. We're quite malleable. We'll really do anything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always mean we turn into killers, but we might agree to things that we don't want to do, or we might
all the time.
And when you're living in this movie, it's exaggerated. She's literally moving from mind to mind, body to body, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that she spends very little time actually being herself.
Yeah, and I think what you notice about this too, or at least I wasn't really thinking about it till just now, is that the feeling is that they don't spend a ton of time in the bodies that they go into. They kind of go in and they do their killing. What they do is they go in and they kill people.
Yeah, it's usually really short.
And then they kill the person they've possessed, and then they step out. Mm-hmm. So it's really actually a job about murder-suicide. Mm-hmm. Literally, if your job is to possess someone, to murder a bad person, and then to kill the person who murdered them, that's literally your job, to have a murder-suicide every time you go to work. Like, hello, that's a fucked up way to live. So, gosh, so surprised she's traumatized. So surprised she's lost her sense of self and can't keep her marriage together. Like, hello, duh. Also, it's this thought of she gets stuck in this one, because you have the sense it happens pretty quickly. They go in, they murder, they kill themselves, they get out. But this one, she goes in and she's in there for a really long time. And the people that are keeping her in there, the scientists on the other side of the consciousness who have sent her in there, her boss basically, who is Jennifer Jason Leigh, starts to get worried, because she's in there for so long. So immediately within the first 30 or 45 minutes, if you're tracking the story, she's not supposed to still be in there, and shit's about to get fucked up.
Well, and Jennifer Jason Leigh as her, and again, I won't give any spoilers, but as the movie continues on or whatever, you really start to understand more of her investment in this. And I thought she was actually my favorite character in this movie because she was really multifaceted, and she's her boss, but it's more than that. I don't know. I don't want to give anything away, but I loved the ending of this movie.
I do too. I mean, I think we've given away a fair amount of what happens in this movie, so I wouldn't say it's spoiler free personally, but the ending, I think it's wise on your part to keep the ending from us talking about it, because one, it's open to interpretation, just like all of Cronenberg and his father's stuff. Like, the ending is very much up to interpretation. This is one of those ones where if you saw it in the theater or you saw it originally, you went to the internet and said, explain Possessor ending, ending explained. There's a ton of those kinds of articles because it's trippy and it's sci-fi and it's very much psychological and all of that. So I imagine we could project a lot of things that are personal to us on the ending. Cronenberg also said that he wanted to make a film as an allegory about how technology can destroy our humanity when it's used to serve our worst fantasy and urges.
Oh my gosh.
So that's what I was just explaining, right? Is that the job for this company who has this crazy technology to be able to do this to people is literally standing in judgment as judge, jury, prosecutor of these people, saying that these people need to be killed, both the person they possess and the person that the possessor kills. And there's no explanation to that from what I remember or that I know of about, like, how did we get to a society where that's how we enact our justice? Doesn't necessarily, I don't know if there's somebody that decides, obviously there's some person in the cloud that decides who's going to be killed and then kill themselves, but it's based on our worst fantasies and urges, right? Like, and this might be in the movie, so forgive me if I don't know this. You guys who are huge Possessor fans might know this, but then perhaps this is just open to the biggest bidder. In other words, an Elon Musk or somebody could pay this company to take care of an issue.
Well, I think that's why I think this movie is so timely, because it's hitting on issues that we as a society are terrified of. We're talking more about AI. We're talking more about government control. We're talking more about technology control. And that's essentially what this is. Technology is great until it starts to be used against us or it takes away our autonomy and all X, Y, and Z things. So this movie is like a modern day Frankenstein. You get the wrong person in control creating this machine, and now there's no limits.
Yeah. And think about when this came out too, 2020. Hi, COVID.
Yeah, it's not a whole new movie.
Hello, COVID.
But it's really, hello, COVID.
We were in the throes of a totally existential crisis about existence. So I can see how this would have hit in a different way at the moment. And I did see it then, so I remember it. But there's a lot of, the film's ambiguity is part of, I think, the Cronenberg's family. I don't know, mission or something. Their style is very ambiguous.
Well, you look at Brandon Cronenberg and he looks like something from the future. I mean, it's like his own father his father did make him, but I'm saying like constructed him out of his own sort of idea.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
He looks like an alien, you're saying? Are you saying right now, breaking news?
He just looks like something way into the future, depending on what picture you're looking at.
I wonder if that's by design.
I don't know.
By ultimate design.
I mean,
right?
they're a brilliant family.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. They have a style and a vision that most of us could never even hope to understand. But I do like their films because they do make you think.
It went Possessor and then Infinity Pool, right? There wasn't anything in between that, correct?
Yeah, not that I know of, no. Yeah, Possessor was popular, but it was also like one of those ones where it was like a question.
Well, and Infinity Pool also, you have Alexander Skarsgård, you have Mia Goth at her heightened whatever. I think a lot of it too is the cast for Infinity Pool.
And it's just and the violence and all of that, people love that kind of thing where people are violent and trying to figure out, the moral ambiguity and things. But I also saw some discussions of whether or not it's coming from a perspective of like being morally neutral. Like, is this neutral where we're just exacting contracts, or is this like what I was describing, very morally gray and or very corrupt, and or coming from like a really nihilistic perspective on life, right? Like, all is lost. This has got that nihilistic vibes to it where it's like, okay, if this is the reality that we're living in, I think all might be lost. Like, this is not a good idea. I was wondering too, since we haven't talked too much about female psychopathy, do we feel like her psychopathic tendencies are there? Like, she doesn't have superficial charm.
No.
She's not lying, but not pathologically. Does she have a lack of empathy? Probably all the way up until this person she's possessing is the idea.
I think what's hard is we don't know what preceded this job.
No, of course not.
And so I don't know how much she's a psychopath versus like a sociopath that was created by this company, by her boss.
Yeah, and it just happens to be that she is violent as well.
It happens to be that. We're not oriented to what's going on at this time in the world. Is this become a common job? Do people get recruited to do this? What are the credentials to have? Or is it like you lose the fucking lottery and this is, what you... We don't really have a lot of that information.
Yeah, they don't give you that context. She doesn't have a grandiose sense of self.
No.
She does have a lack of remorse. I think she loses her sense of self in this process, but she's not, they don't have her waking up upset and remorseful, really.
No.
Just tired.
Yeah.
She doesn't have the sort of parasitic lifestyle. She does have the need for stimulation. She doesn't have that sort of shallow affect. She's very much a person. She's not super controlling. So like, I know this movie comes up on a lot of female psychopath lists. And I think those folks are looking at it as if you shoot people or kill people, you're a psychopath.
Right. Because, essentially she's an assassin.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't know.
So you do have to have a bit of lack of remorse, right? You do have to have a bit of coldness.
We also don't know much about her outside of the bodies she goes in. So we see just
know her family.
Yeah. It's very brief.
But she's losing. Yeah. And so what do we know? We just know that she's moved out, that she's struggling to have her job and her husband and her kid and be a mom. Like she's very much struggling to be a family member. And even the scene where she has sex with her husband when she comes home from the first job, she's very much not connected. She's very shallow. She's very checked out. She's not taking a ton of responsibility for her behavior necessarily. She's just kind of like very much caught up in it. I can see where there would be some flavor of it. Like, I get that she seems cold and she seems detached and all of these things. And I think that leads into her being more and more violent in this next person, the bulk of it, where she possesses this guy. She actually goes off the ranch there and kills the people that she wasn't sent there to kill, and in a way she doesn't usually do it, and then can't kill herself and the whole thing. So there is a devolvement of her mental stability, but I don't get that it's from a psychopathic sense. I hear what you're saying about sociopathy for sure, but psychopathic, no.
But I don't even know if I see much narcissism, which you usually see in sociopathy, right? So like,
but there's a flavor there, right? Like,
yeah.
But I think it's like what we're talking about. I think it's from literally losing touch with reality because of her job.
I think so too. And I think that's some of the social commentary too. When you just sort of become a slave to your job.
Yeah.
Is she a psychopath, or is she just like in a state of learned helplessness? And she's like, fuck it, this is my life. I can't afford to care about these people. I think about this. There was a piece that I did. I don't mean to digress too much here, but I was really interested in this about 7-8 years ago. I started to look at the psychology of people who worked in slaughterhouses. And who they were premorbidly, meaning before they started working there. And I read a book called Every 8 seconds or Every 6 seconds. And this PhD went in he was disguised and started at the very beginning of like the factory work, from shooting the cows all the way through the corporate, where the meat comes out on the plate. And then, people forget what these animals in these massive slaughterhouses look like. And there was a huge psychological commentary through this book about when people do this for a living, what changes in them in order for them to be able to do their job. And if they're doing it, especially if you think about a slaughterhouse, they're in that isolating space all day. They're not talking to other people. They're working by themselves. They're literally scaring animals to death, and are just, there's a scene in the book where they're training this younger kid, and he's not doing it right. And he takes the gun away, and he's just like, you got to do it like this. Bah! And this kid. And so
like fast and detached.
Yes. And so relating that to this film, it's like, I kind of look at it like she's just become a product of her environment and really doesn't have any luxury in having any feelings about it.
No, because how could you? You'd have to stay detached. And I think that's where she gets into trouble, is she goes into the sky, possesses the sky, and then cares about it.
Well, that's right. And I was actually, the research that I was doing was seeing if I could make a correlation between folks that do this type of work and the likelihood of developing sociopathic traits. So to me, it's all kind of like that. Like can the environment actually create this under certain circumstances?
Yeah. And so we're saying she didn't become a psychopath. But on your research, which I know you didn't get to the end of it, so there might not be, there's not a, there's not.
Yeah, it was more like a literature review, if you will.
Yeah, there's not a research ending to that. There's not an answer to that question at the moment, although maybe other people have done that research. But in this movie, we're not saying she is a psychopath. So, but what you're, I think, suggesting is that had she gone forward, there would be, you're hypothesizing perhaps that if she continued to do this work, she could become a psychopath.
Yeah, and let me be clear, anybody who's listening who might work in slaughterhouses, I'm not making a comment on people who work in slaughterhouses are psychopaths. What I'm saying is, I think that people can develop some of the traits that we might see, which is a detachment from empathy and remorse in order for them to be able to do their jobs, which is why there's a lot of discussion around how this also not only hurts animals, but people that do this job. It's highly stressful. Yeah. So I think if she were to push and continue, I think there might be a point where you can't go back.
Yeah, and she ends up breaking in the way that she breaks, and we could interpret the ending as psychopathic and all the things, but it's much more of about a woman who loses her identity and her sense of self and is possessed, right? Yeah. That's the name. So she's in a job where she's a possessor. That's literally her job, to conduct murder-suicides every day, which is what you're making an analogy with slaughterhouses, is to conduct murders every day. And that she slowly could have become more psychopathic than what we're seeing in this movie, for sure.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. And maybe this was the beginning of that for her. Had she gone on to do more, what have you, we can fantasize that she would become more like that. And maybe
how do you not from doing that kind of work?
You'd have to, and that she hadn't already. How realistic is that, right? Like, she was tired and exhausted, and I think that's what you were trying to say originally, is that has to have the detachment from the reality of what she's doing in order to survive what she's doing. And I think that's something in humans that we can all relate to on some level. We might not be in a situation where we have to support our family by working in a slaughterhouse, and we also might not be in a situation, obviously, where we're possessing people to conduct murder-suicides every day. But as far as human existence is concerned, I think we can all relate, or many of us can relate, to having to kind of like those sayings around like buck up and get it done kind of thing, like things that we find distasteful or we don't like. Certainly in psychology, there are things we don't get to sit on our high horse in our advocacy all the time.
No.
We just don't get to do that. It's unrealistic. And I understand that like young students coming to psychology with an advocacy perspective are going to have that goal of like, I'm going to sit in advocacy 100% of the time.
I'm not going to be like you. I'm not going to sell myself out.
I'm always going to be in the right. There's this sort of like narcissism that comes with being at the beginning of your learning journey. And we don't get to do that. And so this is a really good example of that.
And from the words of Eminem, he says, life isn't one liberal arts college. Like,
it's really just not.
It's hilarious. Like in one of his songs, he talks about like, you guys, like it's a great idea, but life is not a liberal arts college.
You got to clam down sometimes.
You're going to have to face shit, and you're not always going to be able to hold the flag.
Yeah, and you don't always get to be the moral judgment of the room.
Yes.
You don't always get to have, life is very morally gray in many ways. We don't always get to do what we think is the right thing. We have to go with what's realistic too. So I don't know. Thanks for chatting with me about that.
About Eminem or about...
specifically
you're
was
welcome.
the highlight of
You're
what
welcome.
we discussed.
Right.
Okay.
We're Detroit kids.
Oh boy.
With the same birthday.
I love Eminem.
Yeah.
I think he's pretty great.
He's pretty fucking smart.
I like how provocative he is.
He loves it too.
I know he does.
He hits both sides when he sings. It's hilarious.
I mean, I'm not provoked by him.
I'm not either. But
I enjoy his being provocative to others.
in his new album, he does a good job at going, oh, you thought I was on this side. Oh, you thought I was on this side. And he's kind of making fun of like how easily, just by saying this, how someone can jump down his throat.
Yeah, he's making fun of like, I don't really care if you like me or not, which is delightful.
He really, sorry guys, but he really does give it to the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha in this.
They do, and they eat it up too, though, because I've seen on social media they eat it up as well. Like Eminem's talking to them. That's cool.
Yeah,
no,
he's cool. Yeah.
So in a massive twist of events and irrelevancy to this episode, we thank you very much for listening to this episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Eminem. Sleep safe, everyone.